You ran super speedways exclusively, I think, at the cup level. Why was that?
We just didn't have. I would talk to Robert Yates about the shorter tracks and all, and certainly, number one, the budget, to race with, and the help. We'd get our car ready to go race and come home, and the farm guys, it'd take them 2 or 3 weeks to get caught up where they could go again. And so in between, when the Cup teams would go to, places like Bristol, Martinsville, Richmond, tracks like that we would love to have run, we didn't have the cars, didn't have the engine package. Robert, we wasn't paying big money to run a Yates engine. That was kind of a friendship deal in itself. The relationship that Robert and my brother had, Marvin. So it would take us, and somebody asked me yesterday, we was up at Childress's shop, and the cars and all that they have per driver, the most cars that I had at any one time was three Cup cars, and 2 of them was wrecked. So we had one to race with. Now, we did take our race car occasionally. We'd run the Daytona 500 and come home and freshen that car up and change the engine and run it in Atlanta. And because Atlanta run right back to Daytona, which I'm hearing some talk today about the new NASCAR schedule. Is that change is coming again? Is that right?
I've not
Hey,
heard.
you're in the know, man.
I'm thinking that you might see Atlanta run the win. I don't make the announcements, but I've heard that from a couple of people. I got a couple of texts this morning like Atlanta's running maybe before the West Coast swing. But anyway, they did that for years and years and years. But we'd take that car and come to Atlanta and run it. But it's hard to take a car that we was going to get ready for Talladega in April and take it to Martinsville.
Yeah.
Man, it took us 2 months to beat out fenders and Robert, would have had to charge more for a different engine, for a short track camshaft type setup and all. We didn't have gears, springs, there was just, I was friends with Bill Elliott, but I couldn't back my truck up to the door up there and haul off a load of parts, Robert pretty much did that for us over the years, but, we were just fortunate to get to run those 6, 8, or 10 or so races a year, and very blessed to get to do that.
Yeah.
And to be able to pay the bills, because the prize money back then, we appreciated what we got, and the sponsorship money, but those Cliniment toothpaste sponsors and all that we had, that wasn't real big checks.
You were leading the Talladega ARCA race the following year, 1985, when something broke and turned you head on into the wall. What happened?
Yeah, that race had gone late that day, late in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And me and Davey were both running Yates's engines. And it made a difference at any track, but especially a Daytona, Talladega. You put that Yates horsepower under the hood and you get your car halfway in the game, and you're going to be a contender, and especially over in the other garage. And we had led a lot that day. And Davey even told Robert when it was over, Davey won it. He said, I don't know that I could have passed Ken. We were leading him, and we were inside of 10 to go. And a car going into turn 1 had dropped an engine. And I understand the tower. They had caution after caution. We had a couple of red flags. I think we even lost the driver that day in a wreck. And it was late, and we were down the back stretch in turns 3 and 4, and the caution didn't come out. Well, I was the first car going into 1, and I got in the oil, and me and Billy Harvey spun. Harvey was running third. Davey was second. Davey was up above it, and I let the car, get out from under me, and I overcorrected it, and it got a bite, and it turned head on into the wall. And, we're down there back in those days with heavy open face helmets, no head and neck restraints, seat belts that would stretch and give, seats that wasn't containment seats, and it broke the C2 in my neck. And I was conscious when the emergency crew got to me. I told them that my neck, that I couldn't move my neck, that something was wrong with my neck. And they put a halo on me and got me out of the car and took me to Anniston and reset that C2. And, you know, the guys did a great job. I mean, I raced 9 weeks. 9 weeks later, I run a race at Michigan. I was bound determined at that point that I wasn't going to quit. And felt like I gave that race away, should have won it for the guys. So my brother got Lenny Pond to run the car a time or two while I was out. Then we went to Michigan. I was racing that year with Roger Hamby. Roger had called my brother, and we had put some of our equipment with his equipment, and I was running the speedways for Roger Hamby. And I want to say it was Phil Parsons driving the short tracks for Roger Hamby. And so they got Lenny Pond to fill in for me. But 9 weeks later, I ran a race at Michigan and finished it. Of course, Michigan was an easier track, you know, with G-forces and all. It was the right track to go to, 400 miles. And so I came back and ran some more.
Now, how badly were you hurt?
I had a halo. They took the C2 was fractured. They put me in traction that Sunday night. Didn't put me asleep. I remember feeling that bone going back in place. And they had me in traction. They put a halo on me and a body cast down to my waist. And a couple of days later, that Tuesday or so, they transported me from Anniston to Macon, Georgia. And I stayed in the Macon hospital for a day or so and ended up almost just walking out. I told them, I said, look, I can go home. And my wife was trying to be very careful. She had a medical background. She was wanting to make sure she could take care of Adam and David and me at home with a body cast on and a halo. That cast came down to my waist. So they set up a program for me to go to the Houston Clinic in Columbus. And I'd go down to Houston Clinic and work out with a body cast on and a halo. You know, you'd have to turn. You couldn't. And they put a steering wheel loaded. I'd work with a steering wheel and could lift a few weights and do some exercising. And I pushed an envelope, and I came back 9 weeks. Of course, that ain't nothing. Richard Petty, he run a race with a fractured vertebrae, didn't he? I think he hurt a vertebrae and raced a week or two, and then went to the doctor and found he'd had a fractured vertebrae in his neck. Well, so I guess my 9 weeks later, you know, but
all right, so you were basically racing for fun. It was a really expensive hobby, from what I'm hearing you say. Why go back so soon? Why risk that so soon after that accident?
Go back racing again. Well, you know, I never had any fear. I don't think any of the race car drivers, even today, if they had a race, the next one at Talladega and the speeds was 210 again, they would race it. They're not afraid of speed. I never was afraid of speed. State patrolmen don't buy that on the side of the road when you try to justify why you was running over the speed limit. But, you know, I just didn't have any fear of injury, you know, driving race cars. And we felt like that was kind of one of those things that happened that maybe shouldn't have happened, but it did. And we'd fix our race car back and go racing again. So we did, and I guess in '88, I had a wreck up here in Charlotte, and maybe I started thinking twice at that time about it, because it wasn't long after that I felt like that maybe, you know, if I can't do it full time and do it 100% the way it should be done, we couldn't determine. It looks like that we blew a lower radiator hose off of that car, and we didn't have a braided hose back in that day, and it blew off and dumped water, and got up into the turn one wall hard, and
Now, is that ARCA race? Or
that
is
was
that
a cup
Cup?
deal.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Didn't you buy the car that Greg Sachs won with at Daytona? And how much of the stuff that won that race for Greg was still on the car when you got your hands on it?
Yeah, we bought that car when Greg ran it at Daytona in '85
Yeah.
in July, and they won with it. You know, I think that car was kind of. I was real close to Robert at that time over at Digard, and that number 9 Ford up in Dawsonville was making everybody scratch their heads. You know, it was.
Yeah.
I mean, Bill would show up and everybody would be at Talladega, and we'd all run 207, 208, and 209. Well, here comes Bill. Well, what's Bill going to do? He just blows it out of 212. Wasn't even close. You know, that race that I got hurt in, that Saturday race, they got Lenny to fill in for me because we'd qualified for Sunday. And Bill got down 2 laps and made them up under green.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Under green without a drafting partner. Now you go down there, you better keep a drafting partner or you'll go a lap down like that.
That's right.
Well, he made up 2 under green. So in the answer to that, I think that Robert and them did a development car. And a wizard Gary Nelson was. You know, he was the right one to have involved in it to go along with Robert. And so they put Gary in charge of it. And they got Greg Sachs, who was a hustler. I mean, he would hustle a car down into the corners as hard as anybody. And took it to Daytona and won. And they came back, and Robert started building a Ford. And they were going to run that Ford in October in Charlotte. Experimental Ford, number 10, TRW experimental car. Well, Robert was building engines, you know, for Richard Petty, a couple of other drivers. And I think that Bobby Allison wasn't too keen on that. You know, that was his competition. So he ended up leaving, and Greg Sachs, they put him into 22. And that car became for sale at the end of that year. Robert and Gary put me in the Ford, the first Ford engine that Robert built, first Ford, over at Gardner, at Digard.
Yeah.
They ran it in probably 87 or something like that in Charlotte in the fall race. And I qualified that car in the field, and Robert walked over to me and Gary. He said, "You just qualified in. You got 30 horsepower less than our Chevrolet motors have, and y'all made the race." And that was the first Ford that he had built. And we had our car entered for that race, and Jody Ridley drove it. But Jody was a friend of ours down in Georgia. But we did end up buying that car, and we raced it a few times. I got it in the fence down at Daytona in a 125. We qualified in for the 500 that year. And, you know, but that car actually came back to Unadilla. Some of my buddies down there got it, raced it on a dirt track. Cordele, Dublin, dirt tracks in South Georgia. And Robert asked me one time later on, you know, what happened to that car. And I suppose when those guys got finished racing it on a dirt track that it was used up.
Now, how much of the stuff that won the race for Greg was still on that car when you got it?
Not a lot.
What did win the race for Greg that day?
Well, I certainly they could put a good car on the track. I mean, Gary Nelson, he was amazing. Greg Sachs was a driver. He was in a good piece that day. Now you add into that you're at Daytona and you got a Yates engine under the hood. I mean, that's a formula for winning a race. I mean, you know, a good car, a good crew chief on the box like Gary making the good calls with a good engine under the hood that's got good horsepower, and a driver like Greg, that was a combination for a winner. And I don't know how it all played out. I remember being in that race, but, I'm trying to think of who was leading that place. Well, where did Elliott finish in that race?
I do not know.
Was he second?
I don't think so.
I don't know.
I don't know. I do not know.
But they had a winning combination. Now,
Yeah.
it wasn't a fluke that a car like that won.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, 1988, Daytona Speed Week, the plan was for Tim Richmond to drive your car. How did that all come about?
When Tim was running Indy cars, he was one of my favorite drivers. And the weeks that we wasn't at a racetrack, I read the news publications and I tried to watch anything I could on TV. I was a motorsports nut, so Tim Richmond was my favorite driver. And I can remember telling my brother Marvin several times, I said, Marvin, Tim Richmond's going to kill himself if he don't quit wrecking them Indy cars. I said, man, he just wrecked at Pocono. And I said, the car just disintegrated, which everybody's wrecked in Indy car back in the day was like that. But they had a safe driver compartment. I suppose it's a little bit of that same way today. But Tim was my guy. He was my favorite. He was a race car driver now. He's what I thought a race car driver ought to be. He was cool, classy, dynamic in a race car, wheel man. I just like Tim Richmond. So Tim had got a little bit upside down with NASCAR and couldn't get a license to drive. And he wanted to run the Clash or the whatever that was called that year at Daytona. For pole setters, winners, maybe the Busch Clash. But anyway, he called Robert Yates. And Robert said, well, Tim, Davey is driving my car. And they had Texaco, and he said it'd be kind of hard for me to do anything. But, I'm doing Ken's cars, and Ken's got one of our cars, and he'll have one of my motors. And Robert was always fair and square. My stuff was great and good. He said, you might check with him. So Tim called me. And, man, we said, yeah. Tim told me, he said, look, I'm in it for the glory. I want to win the race. I'm not in it for the prize money. And he said, I understand it takes money to run those cars. Y'all can take the prize money. My brother Marvin was all in. He said, let's do it. So we did. And it was announced that Tim would drive our car, and we was willing to put him in it. Well, every practice session they would have leading up to that Saturday, the media would come over and see if Tim was in the car because he couldn't get cleared through his physical. And he called me on like a Friday or saw me out at the track, and he went over to Halifax and he told me, he said, I've cleared the physical, the same one I have at the track. But for some reason, there was a glitch somewhere that he couldn't get his license and he didn't get to run. And, but he absolutely had the seat. He had sat in the car. We knew what adjustments had to be made for him. We wanted him to practice it, and he was going to run it in that race. And I was willing to forgive whatever we would have not had for the next day or so, or the next week. I guess they was running that weekend. It seemed like the week before.
It was.
But there's a story that comes from that. If we got a minute, I want to tell this because Richmond meant a lot to me. And after that weekend at Daytona, he was staying on a small yacht that was parked down in Florida and wasn't out in the public. He'd get out and ride his motorcycle and all, and it was a bad deal. I was on my way driving up to Toledo, Ohio for an ARCA race that I was running. And we heard on the radio, me and DeWitt, the engineer guy that I had, heard on the radio that Tim Richmond had passed away. It just broke my heart. I mean, he was a great one to me. So you fast forward a few years. Now I'm up here running U.S. Legends cars for Humpy, had hired me. And it's the first year I'm up here with David. He's 16 years old. We're trying to run him, get him into sport, get him going. And they're going to have, for the Coke 600, the downtown parade in Charlotte. And they've got a Corvette club that has put their Corvettes in the parade, and they going to run some of the retired drivers, ride them in the Corvettes. They'd sit on the back of the Corvettes for the parade. And the promoter, whoever it was, called me, and they said, hey, look, we've got a Corvette for you. We'd like for you, because I hadn't raced in a few years, and I'm sitting over there in Charlotte. I said, when is it? Well, it's next Thursday afternoon at 5 o'clock. We got a parking lot where the Corvettes are parked, adjacent lot for the drivers that are going to be in it, Bobby Allison and David Pearson and K.O. Yarburn. I mean, all the great ones. And I'm sitting over there at U.S. Legends Cars that afternoon. It's about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. David's going up to Barry Owens to work on his ARCA car. And I'm sitting there by myself. Adam and Beverly hadn't even moved up here yet. Me and David's living in a friend of mine's condo, Joe McGovern, out at the Speedway. And I said, I don't know that that's for me. I don't know that people in that parade want to see Ken Ragan. I don't know. But for some reason, about 4 o'clock, I said, everybody was leaving work. I'm sitting there, nothing to do. I said, I'm going to ride down there. So I ride down there. I get out of my car, and I'm walking over to the Corvettes. I see them over there, and they got posters on the doors, drivers' names. I see Allison and Yarburn, and this guy taps me on the shoulder. He said, hey, Mr. Ragan, would you sign these for me? He had 7 postcards, different postcards of me. And I didn't even know that we had that many. I guess I did, 7, 8, or 9 different ones. And I didn't even have a Sharpie. He said, I got one. So I signed those postcards. I hadn't walked 3 steps. Another guy walked up and has a Max trading card. Mr. Ragan, would you sign this? I signed that card. I said, well, dog, maybe I was surprised that anybody knew. So I've been down in South Georgia for a few years. I had the picture. David hadn't made his mark. So I walk up to the Corvettes, and I see this Corvette sitting over there. I think it's a 1970, and it's got Ragan on the door. So I walk over to it, and I'm looking at it, and this guy walks up, and he says, hey, Mr. Ragan, this is my car that you're riding on today. And I said, really? And I said, well, I appreciate you having me. Well, they getting the drivers on the cars, and we're getting ready. Well, during that route, he told me the story. Said, Tim Richmond was my uncle. Said, I'm his nephew. I'm his sister's son. And this is his Corvette.
Wow.
And me and my sister appreciate all that you meant to Tim with you allowing him to have a chance to run another event down at Daytona, offering him the car that you was going to run. All of that meant a lot to him, and we wanted you to ride on his Corvette in this parade. Now, you back up, and I was sitting up there, almost didn't go that day.
Yeah.
And that is one thing that I am thankful for, that I made the trip down to Charlotte and got to ride in that parade with Richmond's nephew driving the car. And a few years after that, I'm trying to keep David going, and Jack Roush hadn't signed him yet with Ford, and that guy called me and said his sister was going to sell a Corvette. Tim had left it to her. And if I'd had the money, I'd like to have bought it. I wonder who's got it today. But what a special memory that is for me, and a lot of appreciation for that family, for Tim's family, to have that much appreciation for what we did for Tim, because he was a classic.
There was a lot of controversy with him that Speed Weeks in particular. A lot of rumors. He's drug tested. There was rumors about the AIDS and everything. Did you have any kind of concern yourself about being associated with him down there? Because this was NASCAR and Tim, and they were butting heads.
They were.
Did you have a concern?
I really didn't. And I was at the Michigan race prior to that Daytona race, and a couple of the drivers stood up in the drivers' meeting, and I'm very aware of that. As a matter of fact, on pit road that day for qualifying, Tim Richmond's car was in front of mine, and we almost had to wait on him to get in the car to go out and qualify. I think they had to get him out of the motorhome and bring him out find him and get him on a golf cart to get him qualified. And that was his last race. And all of that bothered me. But I was a friend of Tim Richmond's. He wanted to drive that race. I was all in. My brother might have been in a little bit as a banker on the money part. I was all in because of Tim Richmond, and my brother was too. We felt honored that Tim wanted to drive that car. And, the NASCAR officials, the Harold Kenders and they knew the Ragans. We wasn't going to go against NASCAR. We wasn't going to do anything against NASCAR. If they give him a license and they clear him to drive, absolutely. Here's the seat and the steering wheel, Tim, let's go race. If they say, no, you can't, then we understood. We didn't fuss and badmouth anybody because they didn't let our driver get in the car and run the race. We understood. We wasn't going to cause trouble, but we sure would have liked to have stood on the pit wall and watched him compete in that race. I'd like to know how he'd have finished in it. I got an inkling that he could have won it. There again, as a winning combination, a good car, a Yates car, a good engine, a driver that can get it done at Daytona, the right track, we could have won that race. But you don't know. I like to reminisce sometimes and then think and all, but.
Did you ask him about the rumors?
No, I didn't. Now he had a PR guy, an agent. And I talked to him a lot. And he knew that I knew that there were some problems and that there was a chance that he wouldn't get cleared. We felt like he would, and I think Tim felt like he would. He gave it an honest effort in that hospital every day, getting a test. And but we didn't really question that. I think the whole garage was had respect for Tim Richmond. Yeah, he made some mistakes, but hadn't we all, somewhere along the way? But, what a classic he was. And, he fit right into Harry Hyde's operation, man. What a show that was.